Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Masechet Eruvin, daf Yud Chet. Very interesting daf. We're going to get into Agadata. So actually a little discussion before class about this, but I wanted also to say so in class, if you're feeling like Eruvin is tough and hard and complicated and a lot of new terminology, first of all, have patience. The new terminology will just become part of who you are and what you are. I saw a great meme yesterday. It wasn't exactly a meme, but it was a picture of Parutz Merubah Laomed, right, with this breached wall. And it was basically, they were making a joke about the schools starting this year. It's going to be Parutz Merubah Laomed. So it was good to, right? It's good when you get those jokes, right? And you understand, wow, right? It's a good reference to our lives. So anyway, stick with it because even if it's complicated, it gets easier. Things, right, become things that at the beginning seem foreign, become just part of your way of speaking. And I also wanted to just say, this is why I thought of speaking about this today, is that every few dapim you get a whole interesting thing of Agadata and famous things that you know exist and you've maybe never even seen them inside, or maybe you have, but not in the context here of what we're learning. And here's a good daf for that. So we're going to start kind of technical and then we're going to move into interesting Agadatot. So let's start with, we were at the Mishnah at the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Bet. We were talking about Pasei B'Ra'ot, this system that the rabbis enabled. Again, you see here this idea that the rabbis want to help people. So people need to drink, and they can't drink if they're going to end up putting it in, bringing it from the private domain of the well and then carry it into the public domain. So they allowed this idea of Pasei B'Ra'ot, either for Jumadim, which are two-sided, right, at right angles, two pasim that basically are at right angles with each other, 4 of them all around, which are like 8 because each one is made up of 2, or according to Rabbi Meir, you have to put ones in the middle also. Then we saw there 10 tefachim high, 6 tefachim wide, right, which 6 tefachim is a shear of an amah, basically 1 amah. Their thickness is any kind of thickness, and then it's basically you have to be able to fit into that space 2 groups of tzemed bakar, as they say, which is a group of cows or some sort of animal that they would bring to drink water. So is the group made up of 3 or is it made up of 4? That's the machlok of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, which gets us, Rabbi Meir says 3 because he wants to get to 10 amma, which is our classic space. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's for the animals to drink, and generally they went in packs of 4. So therefore it's 2 packs of 4 each. And then, I actually didn't read this well. I read this as if it was Rabbi Yehuda, so I want to go back. The 3 lines from the bottom of the page where it says, Kshurot v'lo mutarot, and echad nechneseh v'echad yotzeh, is they're supposed to be tied and not loose, which means it's going to be we're going to be a little more stringent about how much space. That's both Rabbi Meir and both Rabbi Yehuda. When they talk about the animals, they mean not tied, not loose, basically tied, bound together. And 3 going in one direction, 3 going in the other, or 4 going in one and 4 going in the other. Why is that? So first of all, that's actually more strict. It's more of a leniency because then we're going to have a little more space if they're going to be going in different directions. That's what the Mefarshim say. I don't know if it's 100% true, but what they say is that why is it like that? Because the animals are going in to drink while other animals are going out to drink. So this is like the typical way that you would end up. It's kind of like the lechem apanim with the kohanim bringing the bread in and the other one's bringing it out. You can imagine the same thing. This is the typical way they drank, where some were going in and some were going out, to allow them to go in and drink. So that's the space you need. Now they say, mutar la'akriv lebe'er. So how close can you put these next to the be'er? You can go as close as you want, as long as there has to be just enough space for the cow to get in and drink. Mutar laharchik. I don't know why you would want to do it so close together. The whole idea is you want space, but the point is it still works, right? Or they really want to say, I think, that it only works if you have enough space for the animal to get in. Has to be that amount of space because that's what it's really meant for. Then they say, mutar laharchik koshu, how far away can it be? So you can do it as much as you want. Ubavad she'ober b'pasim. Well, the issue is only if you get too far, and the jumodim are obviously more than either 13 1/3 or 10 amot, then you just have to keep putting up more boards in the middle. Like Rabbi Meir said, put a board in the middle of each one. Here we say, put more every time you extend it, just make sure that the space in between each one isn't too large, and then it's fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, connecting with what we talked about earlier in the previous daf, ad beit sa'atayim. You can only have it until 5,000 square amot. More than that is already too big. Can't do it that big. Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, Lo amru beit sa'atayim ela legina u'karpaf. That whole beit sa'atayim measurement was only for a gina and a karpaf. Okay, what is that? A gina and a karpaf is an area. Okay, karpaf is like a stadium, some big space that might have walls, or boundaries, but it wasn't hukaf lidira. It wasn't meant for people to live there. So if it's not a living space, then we're only going to allow it up to the size of a beit se'ah. So a courtyard, it's also not for living. Okay, not a courtyard, a garden. A garden is not for living purposes. So therefore, a garden or a karpaf is limited to beit sa'atayim. So even if it has walls around it, you can't carry in it if it's more than 5,000 square cubits, because then it's just too big. But if it was a pen or a stable or a backyard or a front yard, that's different. A gina, we're assuming it's something off your property where nobody lives. But these things are part of your property, or they're for animals to live in. And some people say even sometimes the deer, the shepherd would live in. The sahar is something that's in your property, and the deer is something that's out, right, where the shepherd is with his sheep. So those areas are, we saw already that the muktzah is the backyard, right, also on your roof, but here it means your backyard. And those things, afilu beit chamisha korin, afilu beit asara korin, remember, beit sa'atayim is 2 cord. What if it's 5 or 10, right? It's fine, mutal. Those are all considered spaces, living spaces. Because they're living spaces, there's no limit. This is all to tell you, why did we start here? To say, Rabbi Yehuda, you said beit sa'atayim is a shear for pasei bira'ot. So, no. That shear has nothing to do with pasei bira'ot. That shear has to do with gina and karpaf and things that have actual walls around and whether you can carry in them or not. But it has nothing to do with this. And therefore the rabbis say you can go as far as you want. As long as you keep putting more boards in the middle, you're totally fine. Now what the Gemara is going to do is bring up all sorts of different Tanaitic opinions that have to do with, now we talked about pasei bira'ot. Bira'ot is around a be'er. A be'er is a well, has water that's coming from a stream. So there's always water in the be'er. But is that the same as a bore? A bore is a cistern, which is made from rainwater, which when there's no rain, it's going to be empty. So maybe there's a difference, the halacha between these two. What would be the reason to make a difference? Because if it might dry up, then what might happen? Well, then we'll have these pasim, and people will think, oh, I can carry in this space, and really it's only allowed because of water. And therefore, they might come to mistakenly carry in this area even when there's no water. So some people thought that maybe this halacha doesn't apply to a cistern. The other issue is, what if it's a private versus a public? Let's say I own a be'er, or either a bore or a be'er, in the public domain. Okay, it's mine. Now, it's in the public domain, but it's mine. Now, if it's mine, people aren't necessarily going to drink from it, even though it's in the middle of the road. People aren't going to drink from it, then there's no reason to allow this whole leniency of pasei bira'ot, because the whole idea was to allow the people when they're on their way to Aliyah LaRegel and they want to drink, right? They're coming to the temple on the holidays and they want to be able to drink, or they want their animals to drink. So we make a special dispensation. But here, there's no, if it's an individual's, maybe there's no reason. So we're going to see different opinions about these issues. And then we're going to suggest each time that maybe our Mishnah doesn't hold by that other position, because our Mishnah doesn't seem to say that. So lema manitin de lo kechananya. The first thing they say is, let's suggest that the Mishnah is not like Hananya. This reminds us, if you remember, we had a few Mishnayot in Shabbat that were like this. The main one being Bishul. Remember, cooking on Shabbat, he had a whole different approach to it. And then it was, does the Mishnah hold like Hananya, not hold like Hananya? So let's say that our Mishnah is not like Hananya, Ditanya. We're going to learn about Hananya. First, we're going to see Tanakama, then Hananya from a Braita. Osim pasim lebor v'chavalim l'shayara. You can make ropes you can make boards like this, pasei bira'ot, for a bore, for a cistern, but with rainwater, v'chavalim l'shayara. When it comes to a caravan, you don't do that, you do ropes. Remember, that was our previous Mishnah about the ropes, that they're all less than 3 tvachim in between, and then at a height of 10, and that's your imaginary wall. So when it comes to a bore, we use pasim. When it comes to a shayara, we use a caravan of people, we use ropes. V'Chananya Omer, Chananya says, Chavalim lebor, aval lo pasim. He says, no, for a bor, you only use ropes, you don't use pasim. So now we're going to assume if he doesn't allow them for a bor, he probably wouldn't allow them for a be'er, or maybe our Mishnah that allows them for a bor would also allow them for a be'er. I'm sorry, allows them for a be'er, for a well, would also allow them for a cistern. And therefore, it seems to be our Mishnah is not like Chananya. So now they say, wait, afilu tema Chananya, bor lechud, be'er lechud. You could say bor is one thing, be'er is something else. Our Mishnah talked about be'er. Chananya would agree about be'er. He was only talking about a bor. So that's a way we can explain it. Ika de amre, some people say, okay, kind of erase everything we read until now. And the way the debate happened, the way the discussion ensued was not, let's suggest the Mishnah doesn't hold like Chananya. It started like this. Midelo katane Chananya omer osim chavalim lebor upasim lebe'el. Let's start with the Braita. Chananya said, you make chavalim for a bor, but he didn't say anything about a be'er. So let's assume, Michlal, from here one can infer, de lechananya lo shna bor velo shna be'er. We can assume that he thinks bor is no good and be'er is no good. This is just kind of the discussion happening in a different way. The content is pretty much the same. So then, chavalim in, pasim lo. And then what does he say? He's talking about, right, a bor or a be'er. And he says specifically what works. Ropes, yes, which seems to imply not boards. So he wouldn't think the pasim worked not for a bor, not for a be'er. And then they said, oh, if that's the case, one can infer that from Chananya, lema manitin deloka Chananya. Then let's suggest our Mishnah is not like Chananya. But now they say, afilu tema Chananya, lemaidika amar tanakama kama hadrle. Maybe Chananya was only referring to a bor. And why is that? Why would he not mention be'er? Because he was referring to what Tanakama said. Tanakama said, was talking about only a bor. You do chavalim for a bor, ropes for a cistern, and I'm sorry, you do boards for a cistern and ropes for the shayara, for the caravan. But now Chananya says, no, you don't do pasim, the boards for a cistern, you only do ropes. So now he was only talking about what Tanakama was talking about, and therefore only talked about a bor and not about the be'er, and therefore it has absolutely nothing to do with our Mishnah. Okay, so in the end, both readings basically say it's not so clear our Mishnah doesn't hold like Chananya. Now they're going to bring, like I said, there's going to be two more Tanaic opinions, and each time the Gemara is going to say, seems our Mishnah doesn't follow this approach, and then they say otherwise. So now they say, afilu tema, I'm sorry, lema manitin deloka Rabbi Akiva. Let's suggest our Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Akiva. It's not. Echa be'er harabim, ubor harabim, ube'er hayachid. Okay, these are three different ones. A well for public use, a cistern for private use, for public use, sorry, both public, and a well for private use. All three are in the same category. Notice one is missing. A cistern that's from rainwater for individual use. That's the one not here. Those three, osin lahem pasim. That's where you can do pasim. Aval bor hayachid, osim lo mechitza gavoa sarat tvachim divrei Rabbi Akiva. But if you want to have a cistern that's owned by an individual, it's got two problems. Number one, it's owned by an individual. Number two, the water might dry up. Then we only allow it with a real proper mechitza, a real proper wall. And why does this seem to disagree with our Mishnah? Iluhacha katane lebiraot. Here it says biraot, which sounds like lebiraot in, leborot lo. Sounds like biraot is wells. So it sounds as the plural of wells here they're using it as. So they say it sounds like wells and not cisterns. And he said cisterns of Rabim are okay. So therefore it sounds like our Mishnah is not talking about this. So now they say, no, afilu tema Rabbi Akiva, be'er mayim chayim de psikale, lo shna de rabim, v'lo shna de yachid, katane. Okay, let's stop here for a minute. We'll start from the last word, katane. Katane means it specifically taught that case in the Mishnah from the word tane, the root tana, tanya, braita, tana, right, the author, but it really means to learn in a braita or a Mishnah. So they say, our Mishnah specifically talked about which case? Just the case of be'er, not because bor was not, you can't use it for a cistern, but for what reason? Because bor, if you go with Rabbi Akiva, a be'er is the same for yachid and rabim. That's what we call in the Gemara here, psikale. Psikale means it's clear cut. There's no distinctions. So since there's no distinctions, individual or communal, then we're going to use that example in the Mishnah where it's just simple. They want to go with the simple case that's going to be the same across the board. That's why they spoke about be'er. Not because it's not true for a bor. It'll be true for a bor also, but only for Rabim, because that's Rabbi Akiva. And then we would explain the Mishnah according to Rabbi Akiva, right? Therefore, that bor mechunasim de lo psikale, but a bor that's collected from rainwater that's not clear cut, lo katane, they just didn't relate to it in the Mishnah. But it doesn't mean the Mishnah disagrees and thinks it's a problem. No, pasim can also go up for a bor, but only in the case where it's for the community. And therefore, that's why that case wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah, because it's not as clear cut. The Mishnah wanted to take a simple case. This, by the way, is talked about a lot. It's used sometimes as ways to explain Mishnayot, why they talk about something and not something else. Sometimes they say it's just psikale, because it's clear, right? Even though we know sometimes the Mishnah confuses us, but the Mishnah wants to be as clear as possible. And they pick the simplest case, the case that applies across the board without starting to make a million distinctions, right? Often the distinctions come in the Gemara, where the Gemara says, what's this talking about? Oh, it's only talking about this, it's only talking about that. But the Mishnah usually is very simple. Last one, maybe the Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Ditnan. It says in the following Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava omer, ein osim pasim, ela lebe'er harabim bilvad. He says you can only use pasim for a public be'er. And our Mishnah didn't make any distinction. Sounds like our Mishnah means any kind of well. Ve'ilu hacha katane lebiraot, right? By us, it just says biraot, lo shna rabim, velo shna diachid. It sounds like no distinction. So now they say, no, afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, my biraot. Now, so they were saying a minute ago, why does it say biraot in plural? Plural must mean two different types of wells. Wells that are public, communal, and wells that are for individual use. But now they say, no, my biraot de alma. They're just talking about wells in general, meaning wells that are for communal use, and they're using the plural just to include all wells that are for public use. This is how you resolve it, and therefore it doesn't necessarily disagree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Okay, at this point, we're totally confused. If you're not, you should be, because at this point, we don't really know what the Mishnah is about. We've explained the Mishnah could be like Hanani, could be like Rabbi Akiva, it could be like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We don't really know. Okay, the Mishnah is very open to interpretation here, which is kind of funny because the whole idea was it wants to be simple and psikale to make it very clear, and in the end it's totally not clear what they mean here. Okay, next, and this is what's going to get us off on our long, interesting tangent. My diumadin, and I already explained this, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, dio amudim. Where does the word diomadim come from? It comes from dio, which is two, right? It's also ink, but that's a different use of it. But dio, like duo, okay, it's also in English. In Hebrew, I'll give you a word you know with that. Du mashma'i means something ambiguous. It could be explained in two different ways. So du is plural, two. So now they say, two amudim, right? Diumadim is like a short version of dio amudim. You know, you kind of drop the ayin. That happens a lot in Aramaic. When they put two words together, letters drop out, especially if it's a letter like an ayin, which doesn't have a lot of sound. And they say diumadim. From this is Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar. Okay, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar was an Amora from Eretz Israel, third generation. He said, okay, so he has a lot of Agadic statements, not so much halachic statements. And here we're going to have 8 statements of him, okay, different statements that he says about different things. We're going to start off with the dio, and then with things that are 2, and then we're going to get off into tangents about other things he says. And here's a siman for the upcoming topics. Tanan, I'm going to skip the siman. I don't usually read those. Tanan hatam. There's a Mishnah that says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol hashitim pturin chutz min hadiyofra. Okay, now we're talking about taking trumot masrot, the tithes from the produce. We're talking about figs. Figs apparently grow twice a year. In fact, the Steinsaltz has in the Koran, they have a great footnote, which I never knew. The word kayitz in Hebrew, which means summer, comes from the summer harvest of the figs. Because tzitza is the word they use for harvesting figs, and kayetz comes from there because the figs are harvested in the summer, right? If you go to the store now in Israel, there's beautiful figs. They get harvested in the summer. The winter harvest, there's also a winter harvest, but it's not usually, the figs are usually inedible, except for there's one type of figs that's edible in the winter, and that's the one we're going to discuss right now. It's called diufra. Okay, so any kind of figs, the shitin are the bad types of figs. Any type of figs that you have from the winter, you don't even need to, now what does it mean you don't need to take trumot masrot? If you've got them from an Ama'aretz, and it's Demai, which we talked about the other day. You're not sure if they took Trumot Masrot or not. So you don't have to take Trumot Masrot. Why? This is very interesting. We assume that the Ama'aretz, why don't they take Trumot Masrot, or they take Trumot? They don't really take Masrot for the Levi. Why? Because they don't want to waste their produce. Their produce is too important to them. They care more about their produce than they do about keeping all the laws. Because of that, what's the issue? If it's bad produce, they obviously don't really care about the loss incurred by giving maser. So we assume, it's very interesting. We basically assume they're good people. They just, they cut corners. But they're not going to cut corners if there's no financial gain for them. So therefore, if it's the bad produce, we don't need to worry that they didn't take Trumot Masrot. But when it comes to Diyufra, since it's a better type of fig, therefore we assume that they might not have taken Trumot Masrot, and you have to do the Trumot Masrot. My Diyufra, where did you get the name Diyufra from? Amar Ula, Ilan ha'oseh diyu perot b'shana. It comes from the tree that gives 2 fruits a year, right? There's 2 harvests, and this is 2 good harvests. That's why it's called Diyufra. Du peri, okay, 2 fruits. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Dio partsuf panim hayalo l'adam harishon. Okay, this is going to be the last deal we have, but here we have Adam harishon, very famous, was created with 2 partsufim. Okay, this is the famous sugya that you might have heard before, and here it comes on our daf. So he was made with 2 partsufim. Basically, it's kind of like saying man and woman were created like Siamese twins, and then God came and basically separated them. Okay, so he had, and it wasn't just the partsuf, it means the whole body, right? There were basically 2 bodies. So now we have the obvious problem between the description of creation in Perek chapter 1 of Breshit versus the description of the creation of woman in chapter 2, right? Whereas one was they were created, Zacharu Nekeva B'Ra'am, they were created together, and that's this idea that they were partsuf. Then there's another which says that no, she was created from the tzela, from the rib, although we'll see today they're not going to describe it as rib, actually, they're going to describe it differently. So now we're going to see, so Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, he holds that it was 2 partsufim. How do we know this? Shene'emar in the pasuk in Tehillim, Achor v'kedem tzartani. Tzartani from the language of creation. Yatzal was created. Achor v'kedem, back and front. Okay, so I had 2 parts to me. Right, man was created with back and front, 1 male, 1 female. K'tiv vayiven Hashem Elokim et hatzela. So what about now? We're going to learn on that verse that God created, right, woman from the rib. Rav Shmuel Chadamar Partsuf Chadamar Zanav. One says she was created from the Partsuf. Basically, she was separated from man, but she was already in existence. Chadamar Zanav. And the other one said tail. Now, tail doesn't necessarily mean tail the way we would imagine a tail, although one could say this is saying this is why maybe humans had tails and they no longer do anymore. But it could be also just an appendage. Okay, there was some extra, right? Took a part from man and from that created woman. Okay, so now we're going to deal with these 2 approaches and difficulties with each approach. So we started with Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, who said partsuf, and then we go backwards and we say, well, in the first generation of Amorim in Bavel, Rav and Shmuel actually debated this issue. How were man and women created? How was woman really created, or how was man created? Was man created with both sides, or with as one, and then kind of woman was taken from him? So we're going to see all different interesting things here. Bishlama Laman Damar. Now the structure is always going to be the Bishlama structure that works as Bishlama means shalom or shalem, whole, perfect. This one works well. The other one is a problem. So it's always the structure which takes a list of either 2 or more items, says this and that and that and that all make sense because of this. This one doesn't make sense because of this. And then they always explain how in the end it kind of makes sense. So they answer the question. So Bishlama Laman Damar Partsuf. Hainu Dichtiv, Achor v'kedem tzartani. That Achor v'kedem tzartani pasuk in Tehillim makes perfect sense. Ella Laman Damar Zanab, but the one who says it was from an appendage, Maya Chor v'kedem tzartani. What does that mean? So here, they view the word tzartani not from the lashon of litzor, to create, but from the lashon of tzara, cause me problems. So Kid Rabbi Ami, as Rabbi Ami says, the Amar Rabbi Ami, Achor l'maseh bereshit. He was the last one to be created. Right, that was the end of creation, was man. V'kidam leporanut, and he was the first one to get punished. Okay, classic. Bishlama achor l'maseh bereshit. So now they say, wait, within this even we have a problem. What does it mean achor l'maseh bereshit? That we get. To lo ivrei al malei shabta. He wasn't created till right before Shabbat. Ela v'kadam leporanut maihi. But what about that? If you want to say he was the first one to be cursed, well, that's not true. Ha b'tchila nitkalel nachash, ulevasof nitkalela chava, ulevasof nitkalel adam. Here, levasof doesn't mean this is like Reisha Seifa. It doesn't mean the end. It means, right, first the snake was cursed, then Chava was cursed, and then Adam. He was the third one to be cursed. He certainly wasn't the first. So it can't be that. Ela limabul. But when the Mabul came and God wanted to destroy the world, in the time of Noah, notice who comes first. Adam gets destroyed first. So when God decides to destroy the world, he starts with man. So that's what it means. So we've explained that pasuk according to the second option. Now we're going to go back and say again. We're going to strengthen. Okay, the first few are going to be strengthening partsuf. Then we're going to go the other direction. The one who says that they were created as two images, two people together. Hainu dechtiv vayitzer. Okay, it says, and God was creating man. It says vayitzer with two yuds, and God created, right? Vayitzar Hashem Elokim et Adam afar min ha'adama. Okay, created Adam from the ground, and then he breathed into him ruach hayim, etc. Anyway, why does it say vayitzer? Train yudim, two yuds. Because he was created with two, right? It was kind of two human beings were created as one. Ela lamanda amar zanav my vayitzer. Why does it say vayitzer with two yuds? So they say, Rashim ben Pazi, Damar Rashim ben Pazi, oili mi yitzli, oili mi yotzrai. This is the inner struggle of man. He's always being pulled in two directions. One, his evil inclination is pulling him, and two, yotzrai, my creator, which is basically the yetzer hatov, right? The good inclination, which is pulling on, telling him to do the right thing. So man is always pulled in two directions. He was created by yitzer. It's a double, right? He was created with two yitzarim, okay? Two inclinations pulling him in two different directions. There's the pasuk that I mentioned before. Man was created as male and female. They were created in plural form. That's the description of creation, right, in Breshit, right? This actually comes up in Breshit Parakeh. But anyway, it talks about the creation. It says they were created, Zachar and Nekeva Bara'am. So now it says, Ella, Lemanda Amal, Zanav, my Zachar and Nekeva Bara'am. How do you explain that? So they say, L'chad Rabbi Avav. To Rabbi Avav, Rami Ktiv, Zachar and Nekeva Bara'am, Uchtiv, B'tzelem Elohim Bara'oto. Rabbi Avav says there's a contradiction between the psukim. It says in one place they were created plural, Zachar and Nekeva, male and female. It says in another place, Ki b'tzelem Elohim bara'oto, singular. He was created in the image of God. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Here's going to be an interesting explanation. B'tchila alta b'machshava lebara'ot shnayim. God wanted originally to create them as Zachar and Nekeva. Ulevasof lo nivra ela echad. But in the end, it's interesting. It actually doesn't say God changed his mind, but it clearly seems to be what it means. That God, in the end, decides, I'm going to not create them in that way. Okay, now what's going on here? So I read an interesting explanation. God thought, how were the animals created? Zachar and Nekeva. So the original intent was that man would be created like animals. But then God realized, I want something different here. And what's different? That again, what's the uniqueness? And this is why the description of Maaseh Bereshit, when it talks about the whole description of, the woman was taken from man, and then Al-Kain, Hayu, right, Yazov, Isha Daviva Etimo, Udavak Bishto, Hayula Basar Chad, right, that in the end, what's going to happen? This explains why, ultimately, people grow up in their houses, and then they leave their parents, and they go to get married, and they become one unit. And that can only happen in the description of Breshit, where it talks about women being created from man. So what they say is God wanted to do it like the animals at first, and then he realized, I want a different type of relationship that animals have. And because of that, I'm going to create them in a different way so that when they come together, it's like the merging of something that was originally together to begin with. It's a very beautiful concept about the idea of the relationship between a man and woman. And if we look with a feminist eye, on the one hand, you think sometimes it looks like, oh, well, woman is secondary, and it's not exactly. But really, it's a beautiful concept of the coming together of man and woman, that we were really once one whole, that now separated, and now we come together as two separate parts, and can go off of all sorts of nice ideas. Anyway, that's what they're saying here, and it's fascinating to think that God originally thought one thing and then changed his mind. That whole concept of God changing his mind and rethinking is fascinating. Again, it's just a way of talking about, again, maybe one can learn from here. You should always rethink things and maybe change your mind. It's never too late to change your mind. You could have one concept and then change ideas. Anyway, it's just a lot of interesting things in that one line. Okay, Bishlama Laman Damar Partsuf. We're now on the last wide line of the page of Yud Chet Amud Aleph. Bishlama Laman Damar Partsuf. Hainu Dichtiv Vayizgor Basar Tachtena. It says after he took the tzela from the Adam, then he had to sew up, right? Sew him back up like a surgery. Okay, but El Laman Damar Zanav. If it was just the tail and it was just an appendage that was kind of outside the body, let's assume my Vayizgor Basar Tachtena. Then he doesn't need stitching up. Amar of Zvi, V'Tamer of Yirmiyah, V'Tamer of Nachum bar Yitzchak, Lo Nitzcha Ela Lamakom Chatach. It was meant for where, right, at some point the zanav had to be cut in that little place. It meant specifically there. Bishlama Laman Damar Zanav. Now we're going to go to the zanav, okay? It makes sense, the opinion about zanav. Hainu Dichtiv Vayiven. God had to build, it says Vayiven. He built her from the tzela. So he had to build the tzela. We understand. There's no building, right? To take a zanav or some sort of appendage and turn it into a human, that takes building. But to split them in half doesn't really take building. That's not building. So they say, if you remember this, we learned it in Shabbat. To Darish Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, when we were talking about braiding on Shabbat and makeup of a woman, Vayiven Hashem Elohim et hatzela, melamed shekil'a kadosh baruch hu lechava v'viyat la'adam harishon. Okay, when it says Vayiven, it meant he braided her and brought her to Adam Rishon. Okay, braided, I don't know if he meant he braided her hair, he kind of put her parts of her body together. Some sort of image of God, maybe beautifying woman for man. Unclear exactly what to make of this. How do we get that Biniyah means to braid? Shekem b'karchei hayam, right, on the sea, this is where they have all the different languages mixing because people are coming from all different places. Korim l'kliyata biniyata. They use that phrase of braiding. They use it to mean building. Davar acher, another explanation. Vayiven Hashem Elohim va'amar Rav Chisda amar elev amanita tana. Some people say Rav Chisda said. Some people say it was a braita. Milamed shebenah kadosh baruch hu lechava kebinyan otzal. It was the way he created her. Okay, she was different. Her body structure was different than man's, like an otzar, like a silo. That's narrow at the top and wider at the bottom. Why is that? To hold all the fruits. You want to have the most stability at the bottom, so it's much wider at the bottom. See where this is going. She's narrow at the top, wider at the bottom, which is really at the middle. Right? In order to allow her to bear children, she needs to have solid body over there to be able to hold the vlad. Even though we know there's very thin women that can hold Vlad, but the idea here is the conceptual idea. El Ha'adam. Now we're going to just darshan some other psukim about creation. God brought her to, again, this is the way the rabbis take psukim, and they want to derive things from here about what your values should be. El Adam. So God brings, after he creates woman, he brings woman to man. Melamed shasa kadosh baruch hu shushbinut la'adam harishon. He himself was the best man at the wedding, basically. He brings the bride to the groom. So, mikan legadol she'aseh shushbinut lekatan va'al yeralo. You shouldn't feel bad. You should be the best man. If you're a really important person, you shouldn't say, oh, it's beneath me to go be a shushbin, an usher for somebody. No, you should also be helping people who are less than you. Okay, that's part of the idea of, right, just because you're great doesn't mean al yeralo. Don't think it's stooping, right? And it's below you shouldn't feel bad about it, okay? This is something you should do. Look, God did it for Adam Rishon, you should do it for anybody else. Ulamanda, right? This is a good example of don't ever think you're too important for anything, really. Ulamanda amar partsuf, heiminai usagi beresha. Now, if we're going along with this idea that they were two to begin with, so which one, and again, here we're really going off into laws of tzniut and how one should behave. Which one was in the front and which one was in the back? We had a chor v'kedem, front and back, right? You might have thought it was side by side, but no, we said a chor v'kedem, front and back. So, which one was in the front? Must have been man was in front, not because man is maybe more important or something. No, that's not the reason. A man should never walk behind a woman on a path. Fascinating. They say this. Even your wife, you shouldn't walk behind. If you're walking on a bridge and there's a woman there, it's hard to understand. You're supposed to move her over to the side. Now, how exactly you do that, but maybe ask her, can you please move to the side so I can walk, right? This is like on the airplanes, people asking women to move is a little difficult to accept. It's the absolute worst in a river because there, I assume the idea is the women's clothes, right, ride up if they're wearing a dress, and it's the most lack of tzniut place. And because of that, right, you won't have a place in the world to come. Again, this is talking about laws of tzniut. Why it applies to your wife also is a good question. Some people say it's because your wife, not everyone's going to know it's your wife, and it's not going to look good that you're walking right behind this woman. And what's interesting about this is I saw it said that some people say this is only if you're within 4 cubits. We don't mean you can't walk behind a woman. Of course, you're walking on a street, there's a woman, you can walk. It's just we don't want you so close to a woman. Okay, if you're within, right, 4 cubits is considered the space of a person, right? If you stretch out your arms, it's about 4 cubits. So the idea here is that don't walk so close and behind a woman. And then it makes a lot more sense, right? It's kind of not appropriate. You're encroaching on their space, and you're kind of getting too close to a woman. That's not a good thing. Tanu Rabbanan. Hamiratze ma'ot li'isha miyado liyada o miyada liyado b'shvil sheyistakel ba. Okay, this is a great line, okay? It's a little, whatever. Again, sometimes these sugyot seem difficult to our modern eye, but I want to talk about this dafka in a very relevant context nowadays, or something that just happened recently. If you're basically counting money, now to count money, what do? You put down, right? I did these 5, I did those 5, I did that, right? Or you counted tens, or however you count. If you use a woman to do that, you give to her, and you say, oh, I'm giving to you here, 1, 2, 3, and you're using her for that purpose. Now, if you're using her for that purpose because you need someone to help you, no problem. But if you're doing it bishvil sheyistakel ba, specifically to use her for, and here they really mean for sexual reasons, right? You're kind of trying to get close to this woman using that, right? What in my mind, because this is what everyone's talking about, is that horrible rape that happened, where a man is using a woman for his own purposes, right? And this idea of women are not objects and they can't be used in that way. And that's what this is really saying. And here comes the big clincher. And this is really relevant to when we have, unfortunately, leaders of our community that get involved in inappropriate activity. Here it says, Afilu domeh leMoshe Rabbeinu shekibel Torah mehar Sinai. You see how strong they go? And they see the difficulty in people having issue, right? People taking charge, against people who did this. Even if they're great, like Moshe Rabbeinu, they take the greatest person they could come up with. And they even add, who got the Torah directly from God, right? There can't be anyone greater than this. If someone was like that and did this, lo yinaket midina shel Gehenom. He will not be freed from the judgment of Gehenom, of hell. Va'alav ha'katuv omer, yad liyad lo yinakeh ra. Okay, what does this mean? Lo yinaket midina shel Gehenom. Okay, you will never get freed from this. This is absolute worst. You could do lots of good deeds otherwise, but if you do this, you're at the bottom of the bottom. And this actually is very much matches, right? What's interesting here is that it's just counting money, right? But the idea is that this is what leads to, right? Once you start using women and objectifying them, it's, it can go very bad from there. Okay. Continuing in this line, Amar Rav Nachman, Manoach Am Haaretz Haya. Manoach, who's the father of Shimshon, was clearly an Am Haaretz. He was not a great guy. Why? Shene'emar Vayakam Vayelech Manoach Achar Ishto. It says he went after his wife. So he walked behind his wife. That's not, we just said you can't do that. You're going to say that? Well, what about Elkanah? You're going to say the same thing about Elkanah? Elisha, right? Elkanah was the father of Shmuel, who was married to Hannah. What, you think he was a bad guy? And Gabe Elisha, or ignorant, right? What, they didn't know the law? Elisha was a prophet. He also walked behind a woman. Hachinami, Ella, here's the good line, Acharei dvareha ba'atzata. What did they do? They followed their advice. Here you have it, the women, right? All these men followed the women's advice. They realized that the women knew more than they did or were able to provide them with good advice, and they went after that. Hachanami, same with Manoach. Acharei dvareha ba'atzata. He followed he took his wife's advice. Okay, here you have a good, strong, pitch for women, that they give good advice. Amar Rav Ashi, now going back to the original opinion. He was so ignorant, he didn't even know what all students in school know. Every little kid knows this. It says it explicitly in the Torah. Rivka and her maidservants, they rode on the camels. They went after Eliezer, but not before him, so that it would be, right, sanua. They would be modest. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, acharei ari v'lo acharei shan. Now we're going to have a hierarchy. Better to go after a lion. Now again, I think this whole statement is really just for the last line. Okay, so hold off. Better to walk behind a lion than to walk behind a woman. Acharei isha v'lo acharei avodat kochavim. Better to walk after a woman than not someone who's worshiping idols. I don't think they mean a regular idol worshiper, just someone who's actually worshiping idols. It looks like you want to worship idols also. Acharei avodat kochavim. Better that. V'lo acharei beit knesset b'sha'ah shemitpalalim. Not behind a shul at the time that they're davening, because it's really a slap in the face to God. If you walk behind a shul and don't go in, it's as if you're saying, I'm not interested in God. I was thinking about this because there's a minyan outside my house. And sometimes from Shachris, I can't go, I'm teaching. But for Mincha, sometimes I think to join, and sometimes I don't. And then I feel like, is it a slap in the face? It's right outside my door. All I have to do is stand in my driveway and daven. And by not going, is this kind of like walking, Acharei Beit HaKnesset. And that's the idea here. You're walking. This halacha, by the way, many modify it. We talked about this before. If you're riding on a donkey, or you're clearly on your way to somewhere, then it doesn't apply. And if there's another shul in the town, it doesn't apply, which obviously goes for most of us are living in places where there's a lot of synagogues, and therefore you pass by a shul on the way to shul, right? Obviously, that's not going to be an issue. But it's really that it looks like you're just ignoring God, okay? This is actually on the street. It's more of a problem for people who are walking by at the time the minyan's going on. The minyan's in the middle of the street and people are walking by. It's like saying, oh, well, I'm not davening. That's actually more than just not coming out of my house. Okay, next. Here's a very weird one. He was in Nidoy excommunicated after he sinned. So all those years, Holid Ruchim v'Shedim v'Lilin. He gave birth to evil spirits. Okay, this is kind of this idea that Adam HaRishon was the Av for everything, right? He created everything, kind of thing. God created man. The man created all sorts of things that maybe some of them were also not so great. Okay, like evil spirits and things like that. Where do we get this from? Shenemar v'Yechi Adam 30 shana v'Yoled b'dmuto ketzamo. After 130 years, then he gave birth to something that was B'Tselem Elohim, which sounds like it seems like before that he didn't give birth to things that were like God, or that were like him. Meitive. Now we're going to have to see where this comes from, so hold off for a minute. Meitive, contradiction from a Braita. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer Adam HaRishon chassid gadol haya. Kevan shenir'eh sheniknesa mital yado yashab b'tani 130 shana. After he realized he had sinned so badly, he fasted. Why fasting? Because he sinned through eating, so he fasted. Peresh min ha'isha, he separated from his wife because his wife caused all the problems. And and he put a belt made of figs, and this goes according to the opinion that the Eitz Hadat was a fig tree. There's different opinions about that we saw in the past. So he did all these things for 130 shana. So here you see he was in Adam Chassid, and he separated from his wife. How could he give him birth to evil spirits if he wasn't with his wife? So ki kamrina nahu b'shechvat zera dechazal onse. What happened here? Semen came out unexpectedly, right? That was the whole idea. He wasn't with his wife, and this is the whole concern of shechvat zera levatala, right? And he let it out for no reason, and therefore from that all the evil spirits came. And this is part of this whole genre of, and this is also nowadays became a hot topic based on Facebook post of Rabbi Avram Stav, and about discussing this whole issue of masturbation, and anyway, about how bad is it really. This is one of those sources that's trying to show how bad it is, that this is what brought evil spirits into the world. Okay. We say some of the praise of a person in front of him is face, but not all of it. Okay, this is Noach. I see you're a tzaddik, God says to him. What's the whole thing he didn't say in front of his face? Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. He was a tzaddik tamim, a complete tzaddik. That wasn't told to Moshe. Noach, not in his face, and also not even when he was alive. Some people say only after people's death. This is the Yonah, the dove, found naleh zayit. אמרה יונה לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא, ריבונו של עולם, יהיו מזונותיי מרורים כזית ומסורים בידך, ואל יהיו מתוקים בדבש ותלויים ביד בשר ודם. This is a great line. your food, better to eat bitter food that came directly from the hand of God rather than to be dependent on human beings. And here it doesn't mean, oh, that God should give it to me, but I should work for it and then God will give it to me rather than get it from Ben Adam. And actually he makes another statement, Rabbi Elazar, elsewhere, where he talks about the importance of chaviva milacha, like you should work and work for your food and not try to get it from stuck. How do we get this? There it says taraf. And trifeni lechem chuki means from the lashon of eating, okay, of food. Right, provide me with my food, and that's the same as the taraf befia. Has to do with food. ואמר רבי ירמיה בן אלעזר, כל בית שנשמעים בו דברי תורה בלילה, שוב אינו נחרב, שנאמר, if you hear דברי Torah in the evening, at nighttime, if you learn, then the house will not be destroyed. שנאמר, ולא אמר איה אלוהי עושי, נותן זמירות בלילה. What does this mean? If you're noten zmirot balayla, you learn Torah all night or during the night, you won't say, where is God who created me? When do you say that? When your house gets destroyed, you say, where is God? So you won't say that if you learn Torah at night. ואמר רבי ירמיה בן אלעזר, מיום שחרב בית המקדש, זיו לעולם שישתמש בשתי אותיות. Once the destruction of the temple, people no longer use the full name of God. They only use two letters, the Yud Hey, Shenamar Kol Neshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. So everyone's going to praise Yah and not anymore the whole name of God. V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, last one for today. There's one more for tomorrow. Nitzkalala Bavel Nitzkalalu Shcheneha. When Bavel was cursed and was destroyed, it caused destruction for everyone around. But when Nitzkalala Shomron, the capital of the kingdom of Israel, right, not Yehuda, but Israel, then Nitzbarchu Shcheneha. Their neighbors were blessed. Who were their neighbors, by the way? They were Yehuda, because Yehuda was still there. So, Nitzkalala Bavel Nitzkalu Shcheneha, where do we get this from? Dichtiv Samtia Lemorash Kipod. Okay, it's going to be a place for the Kipodim. Kipodim, we usually say are porcupines, but some people explain this is a bird, a predator bird, not porcupines. Some people say it's porcupines. Ba'agmei mayim, and it's just going to be swamps, and therefore the birds, if it's full of birds of prey, well, the birds are going to prey all in the surrounding areas. So it's like oile rasha, oile shcheno, right? The neighbors are going to get affected. Nitkalala shomron nitbarchu shchena, dichtiv v'samti shomron le'iyah sadeh u'lemata'ei keren. It's going to be desolate, and then from there are going to grow vineyards, and that's going to be good for all the people around. Okay. One more statement of his we'll get to tomorrow. Maybe we can try to come up with something to connect all these and maybe connect it to the daf. I didn't get to that yet, but maybe by tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone. Oh, in terms of tomorrow's class, I'll likely post it early. I probably will not be around tomorrow morning. So if so, I'll record and I'll post early. Anyone who wants to be on the Zoom, just check the WhatsApp on the Zoom group. If you're not part of the Zoom group, then let me know and I'll put you on the Zoom group. So WhatsApp group where I update. So I'll update there whether there'll be class or not, but likely there won't be the Zoom class tomorrow, but as I said, it will be recorded and it'll be up on the site and it might be up already tonight. So if you're listening later, don't get confused by which one. Okay, have a good day.